You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, taking over from the fantastic Don Harris, who has hosted this show successfully for the past decade. If you're listening, Don, many thanks from all of your listeners and every success for 2019. Moving on, each week we'll have an expert from the world of business sharing their knowledge, insights and tips to help you reduce costs, increase profits and drive efficiencies. If there's a topic that you would like covered, or if you feel that you can make a contribution, please email me at yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie and perhaps we'll be chatting here one day soon. Today's guest, and we are so delighted to get him into the studio, is Director General of the British Irish Chamber of Commerce, a private sector organisation which he co-founded in 2011 to represent businesses with interests in two islands and their economies. He's a retired financial services professional, having completed a 40 years career with the Royal Bank of Scotland and Ulster Bank Group in Ireland. He's also founder of NSI Technology, a tech startup which helps not-for-profits become not-for-losses. And he plays an active role in numerous business, cultural and charitable organisations alongside his work as leader of the British Irish Chamber of Commerce. Wow, with all that, what can I say except welcome John McGrain to You and Your Business.
Good afternoon, Alec. Great to be with you.
Yeah, great. We're going to talk about a subject, and I know people, I can nearly see them wincing before we even get into it, but we're going to talk about the very practical side of Brexit. You're an expert in Brexit, John. You've been out there. We've heard you more over the last year. It's a topic that has sort of graced the airwaves over the last year, and we're certainly going to hear a lot more about it this year. Tell me, a lot of people are thinking out there, who does it affect?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure anybody's a real expert in Brexit, least of all the people who voted for it. But first things first, I mean, the British Irish Chamber of Commerce is a trade organisation. We're not politicians. We have the height of respect for the work that politicians and public servants do in this space. They have the toughest job of the lot. But from a business point of view, we represent the businesses that trade between and from the two islands. We're the only business organisation with that mandate that spans the two islands of Great Britain, Ireland, Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And so it gives us a unique window on how business feels about these things. Business isn't interested in the politics, Alec, as we've said before. What it is interested in is understanding what the outcome of a democratic process where the British people voted democratically to leave the EU on the 29th of March next year, just 3 months away, but what the outcome of that will lead to, so that business can adapt by knowing the rules and updating how they do business between and from the two islands to create jobs and sustain job growth, the things that matter in communities, the length and breadth of the two islands. And so our job as a business organisation is to be very tuned in to what might happen and equally to play back to politics what business recommends as being the best ways to land on what we would call the least worst form of Brexit.
Yes, I mean, as I said to you when we were starting off, and the airwaves have been filled with all of the politics side of it without the practicalities being really discussed. And we were talking earlier about Joe Barber, who runs a small barber shop or hairdressers. How are they affected? Are they affected by this at all?
Yeah, well, so the way we look at this, we help people to remember that just because you might be cutting hair, if you're a barber in Barberstown, as I like to think, and I know a barber in Barberstown, you might think, and both you and I have no great value to produce for barbers anymore, Alec, but if you were a barber in Barberstown, you would say, well, how can I be affected? Because I'm not exporting or I'm not even importing from the UK. But here's the point. You're cutting the hair of somebody who is. So either one of your direct customers or somebody that they know and trade with is probably more than likely, because Ireland is a small open economy island behind a bigger island, behind a big, or indeed between two big continents. We all touch somebody who trades internationally, and we all probably touch somebody who trades with either to or from the UK. So nobody in Ireland is unaffected by this. And we're encouraging people to think through the impact, not just in their own direct day-to-day business, but to say, who else do they do business with and how might Brexit affect them? And that's how we've devised our approach to helping businesses in this regard.
What sort of advice would you give to Joe Barber in Barberstown?
Well, so the very first thing is, I guess we might come at this by talking about never wasting a good crisis. I mean, not to underestimate the significance in every sense for citizens of something as enormous as Brexit. The reality is Brexit will change things. So just like any other change in any businesswoman or businessman's enterprise, it's always a good idea to have a weather eye on what sort of things might come down the track that could affect your day-to-day business. Those things could be weather related. They could be things to do with a new competitor opening up in your backyard, whether you're a barber or you're making hair products and exporting them or importing them. What else can happen? Lots of things happen in real world lives of business people that they have to be constantly sort of scanning the landscape and saying, how ready would I be if something like that happened? In this case, Brexit is one of those things. It could affect the cost of or the value of your exports to the UK, or the value of people who you trade with and their business with the UK, in which case you'll be caught up in the consequences of a change in the value that they get for their goods. It could also affect if you're in Ireland, because actually a thing that isn't so much talked about is the fact that Ireland depends on the UK for a very large amount of what we import. Right. So it's our single biggest import partner. The currency effect on that could temporarily reduce your import costs if sterling weakens as a result of a hard Brexit, but there's no long-term likelihood that that would not lead to price increases, because Britain will need to recover some of that loss in currency by way of cost increases for us. So there's nobody immune, and it's a good idea to be thinking about what would you do if any of those things happened. Yes,
I suppose that's relevant. Somebody always ends up footing the bill for whatever happens in these situations. I suppose what's happening is there's a lot of businesses sitting back. I mean, I know in terms of sort of the large corporates and multinationals who have the resources both in terms of finances and expertise in-house, they're probably well covered for whatever their outcome is.
Yeah, so not to understate the impact on very large businesses, and Ireland is proud to have many globally powerful, globally significant businesses now in everything from food and agribusiness, the big household names of Irish food production, for instance, but right across into medicines and life sciences and the education space. We have major universities who essentially export education services internationally, including to our great friends in Britain who come to Ireland to study. So there's no business not touched. Very large, financially sizable organisations. I won't underestimate the impact, but they have the resources to adapt, and they're already based in many different countries, and they will see this, and they do see this as a political risk that they have to respond to, and they have the resources and the time in which to make those changes. And most of them, not all, but most of them have done a lot of work to prepare. At the other end of the spectrum, very small businesses tend not to have spare cash. So despite the fact that the state, Ireland's state agencies, Enterprise Ireland and the local enterprise offices and the cross-border agencies and others have a whole range of supports, all of which are catalogued on the BritishIrishChamber.com website, by the way, and there are loads of supports that we recommend people to have a look at. We also acknowledge that for many small businesses, be it a barber in Barberstown or an importer or an exporter of widgets between Ireland and the UK, they don't have a lot of spare resources, and their natural tendency is to say, you need to tell us what we need to do when you know what we need to do, and then we'll make our change. We think that's a little bit too complacent, but we understand that businesses are pragmatic, and as soon as they know what to do, they will then need to adapt very quickly to what might be coming down the track, and we're here to support businesses like those.
I think we're very fortunate to be part of a nation of people who are very adaptive when it comes to business. We saw with the financial crisis and how people who survived that, and those who didn't survive it, by the way, managed to turn themselves around and come back and do it. And I suppose with that sort of mentality, we're probably better placed than even our British counterparts in terms of dealing with whatever comes out of this.
Well, Ireland and Irish businesses within Ireland has to be flexible and adaptable to survive. You can't be a tiny physical island competing brilliantly on the global stage as we do without having a very well exercised, competitive muscle and a trading and entrepreneurial sort of psyche. And Ireland does that brilliantly. Irish enterprises are now, in fact, family-owned businesses in Ireland, and the greater number of Irish businesses happen to be owned by families, are now creating more new jobs in the economy every year in Ireland than foreign direct investment businesses, who we value greatly, obviously. But Ireland has matured onwards from that earlier phase in our development to build really strong, well-managed, locally owned businesses, not just in the big urban centres like Dublin, but around the highways and the byways where that really matters. So things like making sure that our provincial towns and our provincial communities are not hollowed out depend hugely on local businesses, much more so than international businesses. And those local businesses businesses have to be able to be flexible, and when something comes along that damages their business or threatens it, they've got to be able to think it through quickly and adapt their cost base and figure out how they can be competitive in the new world and go out there, put boots on the ground in Britain and elsewhere and sell their products. So we're well placed to do that psychologically. We now need to do the practical stuff in the next few months to make sure that we harvest on that investment in our skills and make sure that we turn the Brexit challenge and potential threat into an opportunity.
Yeah, and there are opportunities out there. I know we talked about this a bit before. Maybe expand a bit on that. What sort of opportunities are there that you see, that you can think of?
So the first thing to bear in mind when businesses think about what's happening in our neighbouring friends' country, north and to the east of us, is the fact that the UK is a population of 65 million people. That's a hell of a large market in any terms. The EU is an even bigger market, so we know what that's about. But not to forget, from an Ireland point of view, our largest trading relationship, two-way, both export and import, is with the United Kingdom. 65 million people, regardless of Brexit, still got to eat. They still got to clothe themselves. They still got to travel for work and for leisure and for tourism. They still got to develop their own interests. They still got to take care of their day-to-day needs. Ireland is in a particularly brilliant place in which to supply those needs. So whether we're making food, and British people love Irish food. They have a huge regard for the quality of it, for the reliability of it, for the fact that we make brilliant food products here and have them on supermarket shelves as early as 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Like no other country in the world can give Britain the 40% of its food that it needs to import, as well as Ireland can. And onwards into things like education services, clothing, goods and services. Ireland is extremely well placed to serve those 65 million people. The price points may be different, so we're going to have to potentially be ready to adapt to any higher cost base from things like tariffs or delays. But we know how to adapt, and once we know the new rules, there's a tremendous opportunity for Ireland to do more, not less business with the UK. Of course, we've got to trade in other countries, but the most natural trading partner for us is Britain, and our first priority is to hold what we've already built there in terms of trade, and then to gradually find our way through the new rule book and say, how can we do even more business with a very satisfied customer in our neighbouring island?
I mean, in essence, what we're talking about in terms of we are where we are in terms of the political decisions that have been made. We respect them, and that's their decision. We would have preferred Britain to remain part of the EU. But there are huge opportunities there. You're constantly updating the website again, which is
so www.britishirishchamber.com, and we have a unique resource on that website, very easy to navigate through all of the supports available to businesses large and small in both Ireland and in Britain, from the state agencies of both islands, who are doing a very good job to support business within the resources and within the level of knowledge about predictability about what might happen. But we would always encourage people to at least understand what the supports are available out there, and to pick the ones that suit them, and to be as well positioned for what might come along. And as we've said before, this crisis is there to be availed of or to be beaten up by. And we know the way business people think. This is to be availed of, to say where's the opportunity in these changes where Irish businesses can become the preferred suppliers in a market where other people may not have the same relationships with our good friends in the UK.
Yep, I think there's great opportunities there. You have your 3.5.
So I mean, sometimes people say, look, I'm a small business trading more or less locally, but I do have some sense that some of my trade comes from people who are connected to the neighbouring island. And they say, is there any sort of quick way I can think through my position of this? So we have a very quick way, and we call it our 3.5 steps to Brexit-proofing your business.
3.5 steps, I love that.
So let me take you through them, because they're pretty easy. The first one is, if you do have any exposure to the UK, directly or indirectly, you probably have an exposure to currency fluctuations between sterling and the euro. And for many Irish businesses, they have shall we say, a benign neglect of the risk involved in currency fluctuations, and a lot of businesses tend to wing that. We kind of get why they do that, but we definitely say step one about Brexit-proofing your business at this time is not to be taking chances on the potentially very large volatility of swings between the euro and sterling.
And if
there's a hard exit, sterling would be the first sign of a serious weakening in the UK competitive position.
I suppose, just to put your banking hat on, have you any suggestions around how you might protect yourself?
Yeah, so it's very important that people take good advice in terms of understanding what the options are. And for any business that has a good relationship with its local bank, your bank is there to help you to understand your foreign exchange exposures and to help you with solutions. And there are solutions in other businesses that are well available to people to figure out how sterling might affect them if it was to change by more than a couple of percentage points, and to be as protected as one can be, at least in the short term, because over time you still have to change your underlying competitiveness, but at least to insulate yourself a little bit. So that's step one, is stop winging it on foreign exchange, whether you're exporting or importing. Take out that risk as far as you can. Step two is an interesting one. A lot of British businesses say to us, because our membership are businesses right across the two islands, north, south, east and west, our members employ more than 2 million people. So these businesses know what they're talking about in terms of implications. British businesses say to us, how can I still have access to the EU market? And we say there's a very easy answer to that. Get yourself a partnership in Ireland, whether directly putting boots on the ground or working with the many Irish firms who we have, working with UK firms, to still provide access to the EU by doing some of their business from Ireland, not closing down in the UK, but opening up in Ireland. And we're working with dozens of businesses on any given week who are looking for partners that we introduce them to in that regard. Step three is the same in reverse. If you're an Irish business and you don't want to become disadvantaged by being in some way impeded from the 65 million consumer UK market, get yourself a partnering business or boots on the ground, or acquire a business in Britain, or do a joint venture with a business in Britain. And again, we're dealing with dozens and dozens of Irish firms looking for those linkages into our connections in the UK, and many businesses are taking the opportunity to think about how they can serve UK customers directly inside the UK, as well as doing business in the EU from Ireland. The third and a half step is the really interesting one. Business people are very busy. They don't spend a lot of time thinking about politics. They do want to know what the outcomes might be. Our guidance on this to people is that little extra half step. Don't let the future do itself to you and your business. You have a voice in what happens. And people like us at the British Irish Chamber of Commerce exist to represent the interests of businesses, the voice of businesses in Britain and Ireland, to help public affairs and politicians and administrators understand the implications of some political decisions. And we work very closely in that bridge between businesses and politics and policy makers to help both sides understand each other and to hopefully bring about the least worst Brexit for both parties.
Just to go back over some of the points there, is it your experience that a lot of businesses have a tendency to wing it on currency fluctuations? They're sort of like playing a bit of a gambling game.
I don't think that they see it as gambling. I mean, businesses are busy for a start, so this isn't top of their agenda. Most business people are interested in selling, taking care of the service they give to their valued customers, and in getting paid for that. And on a given week, some of those issues take up far more of their time. You'll be aware currently there's a fresh round of concern about the length of time it takes Irish businesses, small businesses, to get paid. Yes. So their concern is for immediate cash, whatever about longer term policy implications. And on foreign currency, well, within the bounds of normal fluctuation, businesses have tended to take the view that they can digest whatever might come along. That's fine when the swings might be 1 or 2% on either side. But, you've seen sterling the day after the referendum slumped by 17%.
Yes.
And there are some predictions of, potential serious volatility in sterling on the other side if there was a hard Brexit. Now, we're not predicting that right now, and hopefully we won't get to that, but that's not a reason to be complacent about that. So our guidance for businesses right now is be very careful that if you have an exposure on either side of the currency swap between the euro and sterling, to be very sure that you're not overexposed and not availing of some of the solutions that can help you to reduce that risk.
Yeah, I think that's a very practical step. And as you said, in the normal course of events, and many companies who would be around 20, 30 years have been trading, and that 1 or 2% fluctuation as it has been up and down, I'm quite happy to accept it, and well, maybe not happy to accept it, but the swings and roundabouts, it does tend to balance out. But I think we are somewhere into the unknown as we move forward, and we don't know what the outcomes of things are. But to take reasonable caution around managing your currencies,
common sense,
and doing that. I suppose one of the concerns also around businesses, as you said, they're always busy and they hate paperwork and bureaucracy. Your suggestions around setting up partnerships with people in the UK are the reverse of that back in Ireland. How difficult is that to do?
Well, most business people exist in between individual selling transactions to think about where they're going to get their next customer. So you're looking after your day-to-day customers. That's job one. But people, entrepreneurial people, and Ireland lives on the back of enterprise these days, are always thinking about how their service or their goods can be interesting to people that haven't yet met. So people like us at the British Irish Chamber of Commerce, where our team operates both in Ireland and the UK, are constantly talking with businesses about the piece of their world that's interesting to them about finding the next customer. And we say that trading in the next country is as easy as trading in the next county, given that we've more or less the same language, more or less the same laws. We are an easy commute. It's easier for me I can do a meeting in London on a Monday morning at 9 a.m. in Oxford Street based on a 6:30 flight out of Dublin, just as quickly, if not faster, than I can be in the centre of Cork. So there are loads and loads of opportunities for Irish businesses to start doing or to do more of business in the UK, north, south, east and west. And once people sort of that dawns on them, they then say, okay, who can help me? British Irish Chamber of Commerce exists to help those people who are looking for the connections that could give effect to that. And there isn't a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy in that. That's just about, first of all, exercising your mind, and secondly, taking the first step to ask somebody to help you find somebody who might be interested in your business. We have loads of people on both sides interested in businesses on both islands.
Yeah, I think traditionally business in Ireland tends to be fairly insular. People don't tend to think of exporting, although that mindset has been changing over the last decade, particularly as the financial crisis hit and we had to look for other marketplaces to be. So I think that's a great tip. And as you identified, we tend to forget these things, that you could be in the centre of London as quickly as be in the centre of Cork.
Absolutely.
And it's just a mindset change.
Two great cities, both of them. So there's an opportunity to do business with both.
Yes, but it's a mindset change more than anything else. It's not a physical change. And possibly the cost to get to London would be even less than Cork.
Well, there are lots of good reasons to go to Cork nonetheless.
Oh, I wouldn't dispute that at all.
But what we do say to people is, I mean, look, it's natural, and indeed most developed economies in Europe and beyond exist on the back of businesses who don't export or indeed directly import. But an island nation like Ireland is always connected to somebody who does export or import if you're not doing that yourself. What we say is it's easier than you think to trade on your neighbouring island or your neighbouring province. Today, with high-speed communications, with highly developed logistics, with connections through people like ourselves that are facilitators at the British Irish Chamber of Commerce, it's much easier than you might have thought to find a trading partner in your neighbouring jurisdiction.
All right. We have a whole cohort in the middle, though, business size, who are neither the ones that have the in-house resources, but on the other hand, can't afford to wait around. Have you any advice of what they should maybe be more proactive in
So
doing?
I don't want anything in what I'm saying today, Alec, to minimise the very serious risk that there is out there for some, particularly highly exposed businesses. The reality is that the nature of a hard Brexit, i.e. one in which our UK friends may not accept the withdrawal agreement that's on the table at the present time, for which there is no other option at this moment in time. So therefore, in the absence of a withdrawal agreement, acceptance, and the transition phase that vitally gives businesses and politics to form a long-term basis of doing trade, in the absence of doing that in a couple of weeks' time in Britain, then some businesses in Ireland would have very deep and serious exposures. The food and agribusiness sector most notably, where tariffs, i.e. effectively taxes on trade, can be upwards of 50% in certain products. But not only the tariffs, that what we call the non-tariff barriers, delays, documentation, other duties that come into play, things like compliance with different standards, many things. And that's before you get to things like queues at ports and all of those types of things. Those are very serious exposures for a key industry for Ireland, food and agribusiness, not just for big cities, but for the highways and byways and the parishes of Ireland who pay through farming for all the local goods and services of insurance brokers and school fees and the many other things that make communities work in Ireland. So that's a very serious issue. Tourism is also significantly exposed, and the onset of the higher rate of VAT comes at a most unfortunate time, just as Irish tourism might be heading into some really choppy headwinds if currency takes a plunge on sterling. but also other businesses who are in their supply chain. And as I've said, many of those businesses are around the provinces. And so no business, as we said at the very top, can be immune from this. And it's a time where business needs to be hopeful that politics will bring about a resolution to the least worst form of Brexit, but also, in the worst case, that they have thought about contingency plans to change their competitiveness, to think about where their business is located so that they can serve both islands, and to be really tuned in to the work of people like ourselves at the British Irish Chamber of Commerce, who represent their voice and make sure that they're heard throughout the political debate.
Yeah, I think the sort of more uplifting part of what you've been saying is there is actually a huge opportunity for Irish business here.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no doubt that people will be exposed, and this is just a natural byproduct of what's going to happen, depending on what that outcome will be. But there's huge opportunities there for business, but they need to embrace change. They need to look at how to do this in a different way.
Yeah, and to come at it not from a fearful point of view, but from a realistic point of view that says, if it's going to happen in certain ways, that's the way it's going to happen. So smart business people read the rules quickly. Say, tell us the new rules, and I will do what I can to adapt my business to stay as attractive to my customers and not let them slip away to somebody else. So the first thing we have to do is to hold what we have in Britain in terms of the trade that powers up, over 400,000 jobs directly on both islands, and then rebuild on a freshly competitive basis at new price points, perhaps, to say that we will not only hold that business but to do even more of it that builds well-being for communities the length and breadth of these two islands well into the future.
I think it's fair to say that a lot of businesses underestimate the amount of goods that actually come through the UK and are possibly going to have to look at getting around the UK to bring those goods into Ireland.
Yeah, so people talk about the land bridge, which is the term that we give to the fact that Ireland depends on ready access to and through the UK, not just for our trade in Britain, but also critically into Northern European markets. So ferries that go across from Dublin to Holyhead or from Rosslare to Pembroke, taking goods not just into Britain but onwards out into the North Sea, across to countries like the Nordics and Northern Germany and Northern France, etc., etc. Those are very important trade routes. I don't want to be equally alarmist on the other side. There are very good people across the industrial sort of spectrum looking to see how can we make sure we get what we call the least worst form of Brexit, working on various protocols that might enable smooth transit. And the Irish government in particular has done excellent work in strong empathy with well-minded people in Britain and in the EU to try and bring about the least disruption. But that's not to say we should be complacent. We have much to concern ourselves with in the next few weeks.
Wow, John, you've certainly given us a lot to think about, and a lot of encouragement around the opportunities that are there for Irish business. And as you identified, the BritishIrishChamber.com is the place to go for the resource to see that. So I suppose all I can say now, that's all the time we have for today. A special thanks to our guest John McGrain for coming into you and your business studio today. Thanks also to George on sound. Don't forget that you can contact the show by emailing your business at dublincityfm.ie with your comments and suggestions. The podcast of today's show will be available on dublincityfm.ie from tomorrow. Thank you for your company, and please remember to join me, Alec Drew, again next week at the same time, 12:30, right here on 103.2 Dublin City FM for another edition of You and Your Business.